Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the U.S. Department of Justice sues California over immigration enforcement laws. We'll get reaction to the lawsuit from the California Peace Officers Association. And the findings of a 5-month KQED investigation into what went wrong during last fall's deadly North Bay wildfires. Plus, with her parents deported and detained, one high school student must get along on her own. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin with immigration. This week, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a lawsuit against California over the state's so-called sanctuary policies. At issue are 3 state laws that Attorney General Sessions says are unconstitutional because they obstruct federal authorities' efforts to detain and deport undocumented immigrants. Sessions spoke about the lawsuit at an annual gathering of the California Peace Officers Association in Sacramento.
California absolutely, it appears to me, is using every power it has, powers it doesn't have, to frustrate federal law enforcement. Stop protecting lawbreakers and giving all officers more dangerous work to do, so that politicians can score political points on the backs of officer safety. I can't accept that.
Governor Jerry Brown and State Attorney General Javier Becerra fired back.
This is really unprecedented for the chief law enforcement of the United States to come out to California and act more like Fox News than a law enforcement officer. This is a political stunt. It's not about the truth. It's not about protecting our state. It's about dividing America.
California is in the business of public safety. We're not in the business of deportations.
Joining me now to discuss this some more is California Peace Officers Association Deputy Director Shaun Rundle. He joins me via Skype. So you were in the room when Attorney General Jeff Sessions made the announcement. What was your reaction to the lawsuit he talked about?
It was a mixture of both somewhat of an anticipation, knowing how the federal administration, the president's administration, viewed what was going on in California, especially regarding immigration. So it wasn't a total shock, but I think for the nearly 200 cops in the room, they were interested to find out where they may be potentially caught in the middle with this lawsuit and potentially any injunctions filed.
So what in general was the feeling in that room, would you say? Was it a tepid response to what Mr. Sessions said, or was it more an enthusiastic embrace of the lawsuit?
I think it was a little bit of probably more on the tepid side. I think folks were, there's just still a lot of uncertain questions to be answered regarding what role local law enforcement plays in this whole battle, if they play any role, because obviously we're focused on just those folks that are committing crimes that are in the county jail system, that especially one of the bills that was covered in the lawsuit SB 54 pertains to. So I think there was just a lot of unanswered questions that I think folks were hoping to be answered, and they were briefly answered just by knowing that a lawsuit is coming.
And SB 54 is the law that limits cooperation by local and law enforcement officers with federal authorities on immigration. Your group represents a lot of sheriff's deputies, police officers, and other law enforcement. You mentioned that you feel caught in the middle. Can you expand on that?
I think so. I think because a state law came out and it was signed by the governor, being SB 54. So we don't make the laws, we just enforce them, our members. So I think they were going about doing their business to adhere to SB 54, but now knowing that there's a court battle involved, I think there's some questions about where does local law enforcement kind of stop and where do the feds take over? And it may be a challenge, as we know, that may all go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so while we're kind of in limbo, I think we'll be interested to see where it goes.
So how do you do your jobs then, given all the uncertainty surrounding this?
It's tough because when an officer, takes an oath to become a peace officer, they're sworn to uphold the federal Constitution as well as the California Constitution. And I think right now, with some of those questions still out in the air, there's a suggestion that Mr. Sessions made to delay implementation of SB 54 until the suit is figured out. So I think the conversations are happening right now, and we want to be a part of those conversations with all parties involved about what's the best way to keep the community safe. So I think in the immediate future, those are going to be conversations that must have to happen.
When SB 54 was in the bill stage, your organization came out against it. Now, of course, supporters of of SB 54 say that, sanctuary laws are policies that are designed to ensure immigrants can report crimes, cooperate with law enforcement without fear of being deported. What do you make of that argument?
It's certainly a valid one, and one that we're very sensitive to, because obviously local law enforcement wants everyone to commit crimes where they happen. I think to obtain the best picture of what kind of crimes are actually happening in California, of course we want everyone to report those. For the purposes of at least the SB 54 argument, our interest has only been those folks that are in county jail, whereas SB 54 set limitations on where we could have conversations with our federal partners regarding those that have committed certain crimes. So that's where our real interest has been, at least on that bill. And the attempt.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the attempt to restrict those communications was the basis of our initial opposition to the bill.
And in his speech, Attorney General Sessions also criticized Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf for her recent warning of impending immigration raids. He said it needlessly endangered the lives of agents out there and law enforcement officers. Where do you stand on what Mayor Schaaf did?
I think our folks don't necessarily have a view one way or the other, because I think the safety concerns were mostly more on the ICE agents. I'm sure that we're outperforming the raids. In terms of anytime you're approaching a home or serving a warrant, you don't always know what's on the other side of that door. So I think there's always safety concerns about any time that you're going to go out into the community, what's the unexpected. So I think that's more what happened in Oakland is, I think, more of a concern and a fight for federal law enforcement than I think the locals.
All right. Shaun Rundle, Deputy Director of the California Peace Officers Association, thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now for reaction and further analysis, Scott Schaefer is next.
Thanks, Twee. Joining me now, our San Francisco Chronicle reporter, Joe Garofoli, and UC Hastings law professor David Levine. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
David, let's start with you. This lawsuit this week from the Department of Justice against California Governor Brown and Becerra. How unusual is it for the federal government to sue a state like this?
Well, it's done from time to time. The Obama administration did it several times. They sued North Carolina about transgender bathrooms, and the one that's most relevant to us today is the Arizona case. The Obama administration sued Arizona when they tried to tighten up immigration law in certain ways, and the Obama administration ultimately succeeded in 2012, and that case is highly relevant to what we'll be talking about today.
And since you bring it up, let's talk about that, because the two sides of this debate, the state is saying, look, the 10th Amendment allows us to make these decisions about how we allocate our resources in law enforcement, and then the federal government is saying, no, you can't interfere with federal law enforcement officials. So how does that break down, that argument?
Exactly. In the abstract, we've got on the one side, as you said, 10th Amendment, the state of California, any other state cannot be forced to enforce federal law. That goes back more than, well over 20 years from a Scalia opinion. And on the other end, the state of California can't obstruct the lawful implementation of federal law. In between, there are ways that the federal government can ask for cooperation, and they can entice cooperation through grants. So the question is, with this California legislation, is have they transgressed that line and gone into the obstruction side of things?
And Joe, let's talk about political risks and rewards. There were maybe a few minutes that went by after Sessions spoke this week that I got in my inbox a fundraising pitch from Gavin Newsom. And then, of course, Donald Trump sent out a pitch as well. So talk about how this affects both parties and the individuals named, for example.
Right. And the Newsom fundraising pitch was great because he bragged about being called an embarrassment by the Attorney General of the United States. He goes, if Jeff Sessions doesn't like me, then I'm on the right side of things.
Like a stamp of approval in California.
And donate here, most important. This is, as a professor would tell us, that this legal case could take years to figure out and to wend its way through the court system. But the political impact could be felt in the midterm elections, and it's the effect of this is going to contribute to increasing fear in immigrant communities who are already freaked out that the ICE is going to come knocking at the door. So that's going to likely charge the Latino vote. And that's going to help Democrats because Latinos vote 80%
in California.
In California, for Democrats. So it's going to be helping Democrats and hurting Republicans who are already, as we know, virtually impotent in California.
But on the flip side, Tuesday there's a special election in Pennsylvania, and the dynamics there, of course, are very different. There's a Republican incumbent who's getting a really tough challenge from Connor Lamb, who is really taking a run at that seat. So does it play out differently in a place like that?
Yes, it does. And I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I know that area very well. That is Trump territory. And so, but that race is very close, like too close to call at this point. But immigration is not a major issue here.
The tariff show.
The tariff is much more important to that election than immigration. But both the Sessions visit last week and the Trump visit next week are basically two audiences. One is in California, where the Democrats it'll help Democrats, but Trump is also, and Sessions are playing to the rest of the country, which are more, or certainly to the red states, not to the rest of the country.
Right. Well, and one of the big problems for Democrats is off-year elections turnout is down, and Latinos tend to vote, they punch below their weight essentially in politics. So you're saying that perhaps this will change that.
It's one in a series of things that could juice the Latino turnout. It won't be just one speech, it won't just be one action, but it's a series. This is part of the narrative that is getting the immigrant community and those who love them out to the polls.
Yeah. Right. Let's talk about the word sanctuary, because it really came about in the 80s, when the Central America had civil war going on, and there was a lot of military dictatorships in El Salvador and Nicaragua. How well do you think supporters of sanctuary policies, David, are doing in explaining what it is and what it isn't?
I think not very well, because when you hear sanctuary, it really implies more than is true in these cases. Old Testament kind of sanctuary. Get to the right city, get to the right place, and you're totally safe. There's nothing like that with these cases. What this is that when we're talking about sanctuary cities or sanctuary state, it's all about how much cooperation will the state and local officials provide to the federal government, to ICE, when ICE wants to enforce federal law. And really all these places are doing is saying, we won't cooperate unless we absolutely positively have to, like in response to a warrant.
But do voters really understand that, either one of you?
Well, the Republicans are seizing upon this. One of the guys running for Governor, John Cox, as Sessions came to visit, he put out a radio ad that said, this is the liberal elite of the Bay Area, and these sanctuary cities, they are, and it's, for them, it's a right and wrong thing. The people who came to this country illegally broke the law. That's it, black and white. And that's how they're playing to the conservative base.
Although, interestingly, when all this was going down on Wednesday, I bumped into the press person for the Assembly leader, Brian Dolly, and he said, we're just telling everybody not to say anything. Because for them, they feel there's no advantage to speaking up. They're just letting it all play out, especially in districts that are purple in California. They just don't see it helping them at all. Yeah.
But these folks running for governor, they're trying to get 41% of the vote in the primary. That's how many people are expected to cast ballots for Republicans, and so they got to appeal to the conservative base.
One of the people who's found themselves in the middle of all this is Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, who warned about an impending ICE raid, and the Department of Justice, David, is looking at whether she perhaps obstructed justice. What kind of a case do you think they have or could build?
I don't think they have a case, and the reason why is that she issued a rather generalized warning. I would contrast it with, let's suppose, something she did not do, is let's say she called a couple employers and said, your people might want to call in sick tomorrow and the day after. I won't tell you why, but it was a totally different thing that she said, a very generalized warning. And you might have noticed that Melinda Haig, the former U.S. Attorney for Northern District, California, has already volunteered to represent her pro bono if the Justice Department wants to proceed. But I don't see that she has committed a crime. Politically, Joe, you often tell me whether it's
oh, God.
But legally, not a problem.
Politically, it's a free shot for Libby. She can, first of all, there's 7% Republicans in Oakland, my home city. And she doesn't lose any political points on that. In fact, she raises her political stature, at least in the Bay Area. Now, if she would run someday statewide, that might be a little bit of a different story, but who knows?
How many federal grants do you think Oakland is going to be getting?
well, that might be a different story.
She did get criticism on her left, though, from some Rebecca Kaplan, member of the city council there, who might want to run against her.
Who might want to run again. So no matter what Libby does, I think she might get some something from some blowback from some political opponents.
Yeah. So, David, you made a reference to how quickly this could be adjudicated through the courts. It's in the Sacramento District Court right now. This is talking now about the Sessions lawsuit. How quickly is this likely to move?
It'll move faster than I think people expect, and here's why. Because the Justice Department has asked for a preliminary injunction, and that gets adjudicated.
Just explain what that means.
A preliminary injunction is that if a party says that they think they have a very strong probability of success on the merits, and they can make a claim for irreparable injury in the meantime, they can seek a preliminary injunction. All of the travel ban cases have gone that way. The DACA case has gone that way. So it expedites the initial procedures, and it is immediately appealable. So I think we're looking at probably getting it to the U.S. Supreme Court this fall.
Okay.
And perhaps we'll see a decision March, April.
Yeah. Really quickly, Joe, we're almost out of time, but Trump is coming next week.
Yes.
What do you expect? We're going to roll out the red carpet?
Oh, yes, yes. You expect thousands of protesters there. This is going to be the Woodstock of protest for in the immigrant rights community, the environmental community, everybody to the left of center in California.
And good for ratings on cable TV,
oh,
no
my
doubt.
gosh, the wonderful TV, yeah.
Joe Garofoli from the Chronicle, David Levine, UC Hastings, College of the Law. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Now, an update on a KQED investigation into the North Bay wildfires that broke out last October, killing 44 people and destroying tens of thousands of structures. The latest reporting found widespread failures in the state and local emergency response systems. Text alerts and calls telling residents to evacuate did not go out until it was too late, while electrical fires and downed power lines strained scarce firefighting resources. Joining me now with more on what they found are KQED politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos and KQED criminal justice reporter Suki Lewis. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I know that you both spent 5 months investigating what happened with the fire and the response. Suki, what were some of the most serious problems that you uncovered?
I think, as you mentioned, the delays between when first responders who are on the ground kind of could see that there was really, really serious disaster happening and that people needed to be evacuated, and when those alerts went out to people. And I think that's kind of like this lasting lesson that I think is being learned from this, is that there needs to be a better method of communication with the public, a better way to alert them when fire is bearing down on their homes.
And then some of the delays were quite stark. I mean, Napa County didn't call homes and tell people to evacuate until the next day. It wasn't just a matter of hours. The next day is a long delay.
Yes, and I think that gets to issues of training as well, that they had these different alert technologies in Napa County, which is different technology than they have in Sonoma County. The fire is crossing boundaries. And then the people who are sending out the alerts, it seems like, didn't even quite know how to send them out properly and who they were targeting when they were sending them out.
And Marisa, how did these gaps in communication affect residents as they were trying to figure out what was going on, what to do, where to go?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big lessons, again, is what happens when you call 911 and how do they, do they have the ability to tell you where to go, how to flee? For example, we spoke to a family up in Mendocino County, the Diaz family. They had 3 young kids. They were awoken by a neighbor. The dad called 911. They couldn't tell him. They didn't even tell him it was an evacuation. Fire's bearing down on their home. And when he asked, well, which way do we go? It's 2 options, one this way or that way. They didn't know. And this is something we heard again and again through these 911 calls. Our colleague, Lisa Pickoff-White, who partnered with us on this, and I had put out these public record requests. And I think that in addition to the evacuation delays, the other big thing that we learned was that part of the reason they were so overwhelmed, and when I say they, I mean both the dispatchers who are getting these calls, the 911 operators who are getting the calls from the public, but then also the firefighters and police on the ground, is because a lot of fires had actually broken out way earlier in the day because of these high winds and other conditions knocking down power lines. Mm-hmm. And so by the time 9, 10 o'clock rolls around and these fires are starting to hit Napa and Sonoma, they already have firefighters out in the field responding to these smaller incidents. And so I think there was this cascading effect that really impacted both first responders' ability to communicate with each other and then how they could talk to the public.
So Suki, expand on that, because, Marisa brought up the electrical power failures, the equipment down, arcing power lines. how did all of that create additional challenges for firefighters? And also, electrical fires get top priority. Why is that?
Well, because they're so dangerous. You know, a sparking power line is deadly. And so firefighters can't even start rescuing people or putting out fires if there is a down power line or if there are electrical issues involved with it. So they have to wait for PG&E, the local utility here, to either shut down the power remotely or send out a lineman to deal with that electrical issue before they can even begin dealing with the fire issue, let alone evacuating people who are threatened by that fire. So it kind of creates this built-in lag time. And then also what was happening is there were so many of these electrical issues because of the way the electrical grid works is like power line goes down, that power has to go somewhere else, it gets rerouted, and so that was like overloading these other lines, then causing transformers to explode, which are creating more fires. So it was like this, again, cascading effect of electrical issues causing more electrical issues, you know, taking down more of the power grid.
So did county officials ever consider asking PG&E to shut off power? Because that is standard procedure in many, for example, southern and eastern states when hurricanes occur.
Right, and this is something I think California is really grappling with. We've seen in Southern California, CAL FIRE, the state firefighter agency, which was really dealing on the ground with a lot of this stuff. They do ask some of the utilities down there to do this. That's a newer thing because of deadly fires. In this case, CAL FIRE Northern California said that just wasn't our procedure. We didn't even think to ask them. It hasn't historically been the way we operate. And I think that gets to this idea that, you know, we want to make the point that first responders acted heroically that night. They went in, police, firefighters, these dispatchers, they were all working in overwhelming conditions and did everything they could to save lives. But the system seemed to fail them. And I think this reliance on this is procedure, this is the way we do it, didn't allow them to change procedure as fast as the fires moved. So now CAL FIRE and PG&E are in conversations with state regulators to have those conversations. You know, turning off power does come with risks of its own to people with medical devices. Streetlights go out. It could hamper other rescue efforts. But it seems to us that in this case, with the winds and all of the conditions happening, that they really should have considered that at least.
So we're talking a lot about, you know, equipment and differences in alert systems, but some of this also came down to just on-the-spot decision-making. And part of what you talked about earlier, the delays in texts and alerts going out, was also based on the thought by county officials that, well, if they put it out too soon, it might cause panic. Right. People will flee. It'll clog the roads. People may be stranded as these fires approach. What is being done to address that? Because we're having a new norm now, right? Where with climate change and severe weather patterns, we're seeing more and more severe fires.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's one of the big lessons we're already seeing being put into effect. They did not use those wireless alerts that you get, like the Amber Alert when someone gets kidnapped. You hear about that from anywhere over the state. Sonoma County, for example, chose not to use those. They were worried about what you're talking about, the clogged roads. In Montecito, the Montecito fire, and Santa Barbara Ventura fires, the Thomas fire down there, they used those. The state stepped in and said, we're going to do this. They overrode the county. I think that's going to happen. We're also seeing changes at the federal level to how those alerts work, so hopefully they'll be more effective.
And just real quickly, we have about 30 seconds. Suki, what are some of the things being done now to prevent this from happening again?
Well, as we mentioned, the utility PG&E is looking at, you know, shutting down power preventively. I think that these lessons that are being learned in this fire, because it was such a disaster, are finally being elevated to the state level. And so they're talking about new state level standards in terms of requiring people to have, requiring counties to have a certain level of alerts in place before the next disaster strikes.
All right, great work, good investigation. Suki Lewis and Marisa Lagos, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amidst all the news of immigration raids and detentions, we take a look now at what happens to family members who are left behind. Our next story is about high school senior Jennifer Bravo, reported by Lauren Elaney Gill, a student at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism.
It all started at the IHOP in Lodi.
I remember we were eating breakfast. It was just a normal day. We were going to go to church, and then we were going to go visit Santa Cruz for the first time as a family. As I was reversing out of the parking lot, I hear a knock on my window, and I look up and I see the ICE badge of like an officer. So then I look over, like I realize that there's like 2 officers in front of the car, 2 behind the car, and then there was an officer to my mom's side of the car. Immediately in my head, I thought that she was gonna get deported, like no doubt about it. And all I remember is my brother and sister crying in the back seat, and I just thought to myself, like, what am I going to do? I have 2 younger siblings to take care of. Like, how am I gonna take care of 2 little kids when I'm only 16 years old myself?
Jennifer Bravo is a high school senior. She is a U.S. citizen, but her parents are not. Jennifer is one of nearly 5 million American kids who have undocumented parents and part of hundreds of thousands that have been separated from a parent by detention or deportation. Jennifer's father was deported to Mexico in 2012 when she was only 12 years old. Her mother, Florisel Ramos, who had been previously arrested for a DUI, was apprehended a year ago. Since then, Jennifer has seen her mother in person only twice. Her younger siblings are with relatives. Jennifer lives with her boyfriend's family, while her mom is held at a private detention facility in Bakersfield. They talk daily on the phone.
I know, ma, yo también te extraño. Cuídate mucho. Okay, bye.
We've seen a lot of situations where you have parents that are undocumented and at the same time U.S. citizen children. The system is kind of doubly failing them. Her father was already deported pretty unjustly, didn't get to speak to an attorney. Just one day he was picked up, the next day he was gone. And now she's kind of being re-traumatized by that whole thing.
Jennifer has attended all of her mother's hearings in San Francisco. This time, she got the rare chance to see her mother via video teleconference.
Cada corte que me están dando, hasta la juez se queda sorprendida de cuánta gente está viniendo. Eso me alegra y me da ánimos para estar día a día aquí contando los días del calendario y pues por verlas.
Vamos a seguir adelante, ¿ok?
After a year in detention, Jennifer's mother has another court hearing next week.
Un abrazo grande.
Jennifer hopes this time she will be released.
Bye. We have another bond hearing.
Bye.
Okay.
Yeah. Adios.
And that will do it for us. You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.